Orchids are not just common to one continent or one habitat. Over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, they have adapted to grow in almost every continent in the earth and adapted to almost all climates, including desert climates. So in this video, you're going to learn about how the orchid adapted, what it did to change to better adapt to that climate and that circumstance. Hi, I'm Amanda Matthews and thank you for watching this video at Orchideria. So we're going to learn how the orchids adapted, what they had to do to go through this process of adapting to their environment. Now, the orchid actually adapted in every single part of its life so that it could live and could survive. So first, let's take an example of an orchid that has adapted. If you're wondering what this is just so I can measure the level of humidity inside the pot. So it is unsightly, unruly, but it works. So the first thing that orchids have adapted to, we can start with their leaf. The leaf on orchids that live in a drier climate, a climate where it doesn't rain that often or rainfall is harder to come by, they have adapted to create thicker leaves. Now, if you notice an orchid that lives in a heavy rainfall environment, their leaves are probably going to be thinner and longer. And if you even notice, an orchid's leaves are hydro-repellent in the sense that if you water them, water will just trickle off. The back side of the leaf is what absorbs the water and absorbs the nutrients and has the stomata, which will provide the gas exchange. The second thing is if your orchid has a pseudobulb. Now mine are all tied up with this cute little wire here. That's just to keep them more upright and not growing out all over the place. The pseudobulb is going to show you also that this orchid probably lives in a climate where not all year round it will have resources to live on. During part of that year it's probably not going to rain, or during part of that year the nutrients aren't going to be most adequate for its life. The pseudobulb will go dormant for a while, and to go dormant you have to have energy. It's kind of like a bear that's going to go hibernate. You need to stock up on food. So you have a pseudobulb. A pseudobulb is just a thicker cane on dendrobiums. They're called canes actually. They're a thicker part of the orchid that you will notice are sometimes wrinkled, sometimes smooth, sometimes round, depending on the type of the orchid you have. And it's just a storage compartment. Now this helps the orchid adapt to its environment. For example, the cataseum orchids. So in this orchid, the pseudobulb is going to store all those nutrients during that time of dormancy. Now in Brazil, when I lived there in the capital, it would rain for 6 months straight and then it would be dry for 6 months straight. This pseudobulb is going to store that energy for the dry season because it's not going to have a drop of rain for like 3 months straight. So it needs that extra storage compartment to keep it healthy during this drought season. The size of the pseudobulb is going to show you what kind of environment it lives in. Now, Phalaenopsis orchids do not have a pseudobulb. That's because in their environment, it's not only because of this, but in their environment, they get rain and nutrients and sun every single day of their lives. They don't need to store anything. They have it plentiful, which makes them a monopodial orchid. A monopodial orchid does not have a rhizome, does not have pseudobulbs. A monopodial orchid will have one stem that will grow vertically up and then branch out, as compared to sympodial orchids like Cattleyas, who will grow outwards with a rhizome, and they need that extra storage. So that's just one way that the orchids adapted to their climate, just growing pseudobulbs, just providing for that time of when there's going to be lack in nutrients. The third way that orchids adapted is through their root system. When the orchid realized that it wasn't going to live in the grasslands or the savannas or the swamps, or it wasn't going to be terrestrial, and it had to attach itself to a tree, it knew that the roots were going to have to adapt to their new environment. Now, there's no soil up in the tree when they attach themselves to a tree, so they have to find a way to increase the absorption of nutrients. So that's why they grow aerial roots. Now, these roots, not only do they capture the nutrients that are in the air, the water droplets, and everything else that is floating around, these orchid roots also photosynthesize, which makes them so different than household plants. That's why we need the clear plastic pots. Because if you can provide a clear pot and that light just penetrates that pot, that's giving them more energy. That's just supplying more energy to them so that they can live better. One thing about orchid roots, they do not only absorb nutrients, they do not only absorb water, they do not only photosynthesize, they also perform gas exchange. That is why it is so important that in your potting media, there is room for air to travel. We think they're like household plants and we just sock that soil down inside so compact that the roots don't have any space to provide that gas exchange. And that is what causes root rot. We tend to think it's because it's overwatering. That contributes, but the main reason is because those roots don't have air around them to perform the gas exchange. And that gas builds up to a toxic level inside the root, and the root dies. Then the root death causes bacteria, which causes fungus, which causes root rot, and then we think, oh, it's because we overwatered. No, it's because we packed the potting media in there so hard that there was no room to provide air to it. It has to be firm. I mean, if your orchid is wiggly in the pot, it's not going to feel secure. It has to be firm, but it has to provide that air underneath it so that the roots can breathe. The fourth adaptation when it comes to orchids are the seeds. To get to the top of the trees, and I'm talking top, it's about the top third, they had to travel on wind currents. Now, to travel, you have to be extremely light. So they had to get rid of this extra baggage. And this baggage, the only thing they could get rid of is their nutrient supply, which is called the layer of endosperm. So the endosperm is what provides all the nutrients. If you cut a bean seed in half, you will see that the actual seed is very, very tiny. Around it is all that layer of endosperm, and that's just nutrients. It just provides nutrients for the seed to grow until it's mature enough to sprout out roots and to grow by itself. Well, the orchid seed doesn't have this because it has to be light. It has to travel on that wind current to get to the top third of the tree. Well, it travels up to the tree. Once it gets to the tree and gets lodged in between the bark and between the, the grooves in the bark, there it's going to come into contact with a fungus. And this fungus is extremely important. And it's going to provide the nutrients, all the nutrients the orchid needs so it can first grow roots and attach itself to that bark. It's going to provide everything that this little orchid needs to make it for the first years of its life. So the seeds had to adapt to get to where they were going and lodge and come into contact with this fungus. Now, the odds of that happening are extremely low. That's why the orchid produces thousands of seeds. I mean, literally thousands, because, 10 or 20 are going to make it. The rest are going to be lodged in the cement. They're just going to be lodged in places that just don't promote growth. And they're going to be lodged in places where that fungus is not present. Now, before I talk about the adaptations that the flower made, do me a favor and please hit that like or subscribe button. So one of the adaptations that the orchid goes through is in its blossom. We think it blossoms like this because, it likes to show off or to please us, but that has nothing to do with it. The blossoms are uniquely and only to attract pollinators. So if the pollinator likes flowers that have certain colors or certain scents, the orchid will bloom with these colors. Now, orchids attract specific pollinators. If their pollinator is a moth that only comes out at night, that's exactly what the Lady of the Night Brassivola orchid does, because the pollinator is a moth that only flies at night. Why are they going to stay open during the day? That's why they produce this wonderful scent at night and not during the day as much. Their whole pollination cycle, the way the orchid adapts, and this part of the lip on the orchid, it's a landing platform so that the insect can land on here and crawl up to get that pollen. Everything about the whole flower just adapted to make that so much attractive to the pollinator. The adaptations that the orchid goes through with its leaves, with its pseudobulbs, with its roots, with its flowers are incredibly amazing. But if you want to go in depth with this and learn the orchid care and the terminology and the anatomy of every single part of the orchid, go to this video up here, which is going to talk about the anatomy and terminology of orchid care. And in this video down here, I'm going to talk about keikis and why they come, why they develop, what they're there for. Thank you for watching this video, and happy cultivating.